Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to take a look at some recent polling on how a snap general election may go, given that we might be anticipating one quite soon, and what would be the factors that could tilt this initial result both towards and away from the Conservatives. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've been playing with stats again. I like playing with stats. Basically, when it comes to looking at polls, there are a number of benefits. It's interesting, for a start. It can help you see how certain things play out in the public's mind when you watch them over time. And the Conservative Party, very crucially, pay very careful attention to them. The mood of the public is one area of research that is genuinely pursued by Tories. They have lots of groups that they throw public money at that claim to be research groups. They're not research groups, but they do genuinely research the public mood. They take no chances when it comes to elections. But there are also three things to be aware of as well. The first is there is currently no campaign going on. This means that even a reliable poll is just taking note of how people would vote hypothetically. You know, where there is no great thought put into it by the polled public. Second thing is that many polling companies simply carry out a popularity poll and map that onto the seats available. They don't really take account of how views are spread in constituencies, or if there's a national drop in support, how that spreads from constituency to constituency, or even how likely people are to vote at all. After all, someone might say that they'd vote for a particular party, but if they're not likely to vote, their response in a poll should not be weighted equally as someone who says how they'd like to vote and are likely to vote. You know, and I suppose the third thing to be aware of as well is it's usually a fairly hefty undertaking to do something like this, and yet just a few weeks can change it completely as one party does better or does worse. And you're not going to get these things updated all the time. But with that in mind, I was shown a poll in the New Statesman. Now, I don't actually know for certain how effective the methodology is. I had a quick read about their reasoning, and it does seem sensible. It seems to be in line with the way pollsters who actually produce accurate results, and you can test those against actual election results, tend to do it. It does appear to reckon that it's worked out on a constituency by constituency basis, which is absolutely essential and is more than most pollsters bother with. I can't say for certain how reliable it is, but the methodology is sound. So let's go with it for now. Then we can worry about where the model may stretch at the seams. The headline news is that the Conservatives would lose their majority, but not by a lot. It shows them winning 316 seats, noting that you need 325 to form a majority. Now, this is the first problem with the way it's presented, because that's not true. You do not need 325 to form a majority at all. Ignoring for now the fact that the Conservatives want to reduce the number of MPs in Parliament, and they aren't stupid enough to reduce them in Conservative areas. So at the moment there are 650 MPs. There are a few things to note. Now, the first is that the Speaker of the House is apolitical. They don't vote. That is why 325 is a majority, because in theory that means there's only 649 MPs, so 325 is a majority. However, it's not just the Speaker. There are also 3 deputy speakers who are not necessarily apolitical, but they don't vote. In addition, you've got Sinn Féin MPs from Northern Ireland who don't even take up their seats in Parliament. There are currently 7 of them, I think. So all in all, that's 11 MPs who don't vote ever. That's a maximum of 639 MPs who at any particular time could vote. I mean, it's 635 for any particular vote because you always have 4 tellers, but they cancel each other out. So unless Sinn Féin suddenly had a net loss of MPs, which seems unlikely, you'd only actually need 320 to form a majority. So this model suggests the Conservatives would have 316. Now, that would still mean a Conservative government. Let's make no bones about that. Yes, it would struggle to enact its more terrible legislation. It would struggle to enact any legislation, but it could still just about bounce along. In other words, the current polling situation is not yet good enough to go to the polls with confidence. However, there are things that without knowing the statistical methodology in detail and how reliable it is, can still be wrong with the model. And some of it is in favour of the Conservatives, but some of it is dead against them. One thing is that we know the Conservatives will run a more effective campaign than the opposition. That will swing it towards them. They will have way more money, because of course they do. They just attract donations. It's not really donations, it's bribes, because then in government they'll just give that money back with a massive amount of interest in the form of public contracts. They'll have a huge war chest. They always do. Labour are basically broke right now. They don't even have as much as they normally would. They've had to fight so many general elections over the past few years. The Conservatives also have the machinery of state, and they will break the law to use it for party politicking, as they have been doing for years, as they did in Sunderland earlier this year. And they do not have multiple factions tearing at their leadership. Come election time, whatever their arguments, Tories always fall into line for the sole purpose of winning at any cost. In addition, they have always had the bulk of the billionaire media batting for them, but it has never been as bad as now, with the Tories abusing their power to threaten and control other mainstream media outlets as well. So whatever the polls say just before a campaign, it's very likely to swing in the Tories' favour over the course of that campaign. They will play dirty and effective. In other words, the opposition needs to build up a good head of steam before the election itself. The last time Labour won, and that wasn't against the Conservative Party, it was anywhere near as dirty as now, they built up a huge lead in the polls, absolutely huge. That lead came down a lot as we approached the election itself, because the Conservatives swung it back. But they'd built up such a lead that they still comfortably won. This will not occur now. It's not possible. Labour are too far behind. Their campaigning machine has been broken for far too long, and they need too many seats to swing to them. They cannot win without reclaiming a lot of seats in Scotland. This is not going to happen in the foreseeable future, if ever. Certainly not for the next general election, no matter when that is. There are traditional Tory seats in the south of England, however, that are turning away from the Conservatives. Now, some of them are turning towards Labour, some are not. Labour cannot win enough of them, however, to get a majority. But that's fine in a way, because here's where there's a benefit. Once you accept that it's impossible for Labour to win, in the conventional sense, you start to make your aim stopping the Conservatives from winning. What's needed is a vision for the following Parliament. How can you imagine the following Parliament falling? From Labour's point of view, whereby they are in power. They can't hold exclusive power. They can't form a majority. That's impossible. So they have to adopt a vision of holding power with the cooperation of others. Now, this is both good and bad. It's good in that we can basically tear this model up, even though it's mathematically sound, because it's based on Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party all campaigning on their own, all putting up candidates, all fighting over each other, all splitting their votes. It does not say what would happen should there be an electoral pact. And there are two types of electoral pact possible, which could maybe include Plaid Cymru in Wales, but I'll focus for now on those in the south of England seats that have been turned off from the Tories' extreme right-wing agenda here. Take, for example, Dominic Raab's seat of Esher and Walton. This latest poll suggests that he will retain that seat. It's under threat, but this model suggests that he'll retain it. Only just. He will lose vote share, but it also shows the Liberal Democrats losing and so failing to capture the seat. But if Labour and the Greens were to help out, then the Conservatives would lose it. And there's no doubt about that. It's too tight for them. If that vote wasn't split, the Conservatives are losing it. And there are, like I say, two types of pact. You could have a real pact, the one that absolutely maximises Tory losses, the ones they should do. That means that the electoral alliance only puts up one candidate between them. In Raab's seat, Labour and the Greens would stand down, funneling the anti-Tory vote into the Lib Dem candidate. Now, not everyone who would vote Labour or Green would switch that vote to the Liberal Democrats. Of course, it might be that not even half of them do that. But it would be easily enough to cost Raab that seat. That seat's gone. The alternative pact, which is too reckless for my taste, but possibly more likely, is that all parties stand candidates, but they just don't campaign particularly hard. That might also see the main anti-Tory candidates win. Jeremy Corbyn did it in 2019. There was a seat in Wales, Brecon and Radnorshire was it, I seem to remember, where Tory MP was a bit naughty, broke the law, had to stand down, had to seat again. Labour did stand a candidate there, but they didn't campaign. Corbyn and the front bench didn't really visit it. They just left it, and the Liberal Democrats won and displaced the Tories, who then got it back in the 2019 general election. But the problem with that is it's too risky. You're not, It's so tight, you've got to maximise every vote, and it doesn't do that. It might displace the Tories. But what I want to see is more than just a non-aggression pact. I want to see a real alliance pact. With that one move alone, the Tories would be on 2015 seats, behave yourself, 315 seats. And that's just one seat. To work out how this model would change then, I'd need to have an estimate at what proportion of Labour, Lib Dem, Green would be needed. You know, so if one of them stands their candidate, the other two stand down, what proportion of the people who would have voted for those parties would still do so to get rid of the Tories? So let me tell you what I did. I don't know what proportion of voters would switch to an anti-Tory vote if their party didn't field a candidate. I've no way of knowing that even on a national scale. No data to use. I certainly couldn't do it on a constituency by constituency basis because it would be different. You know, the national average would not be the same on a seat by seat basis. So what I did is I suppose, so first of all, any seats where the Conservatives had 50% of I just got rid of, because I'm not assuming the Conservatives are going to lose any out of this pact. Of course they're not. In theory, they could gain a few. So what I did is I supposed with this model, if a Conservative candidate had a lead over their rival of 5% or less, an electoral pact would comfortably flip it. I also noted down how many seats only had a margin of 10%, because I think these are probably winnable with an electoral pact plus a good strategic targeting policy. So let me tell you what I found. There were 41 seats that have the Tory candidate winning by 5% or less, and a further 26 when it's more than 5%, but within 10%. And there were quite a few on just over 10%. If it was 10.1%, I went, no, I'm not counting it. There were a few on just over 10%. So it could get a bit tastier. Now, I'm going to assume that the alliance here is Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. But Plaid and the SNP can come into this in a bit, even without this formal alliance. With the model as it is, the Conservatives are on 316 seats and the alliance, if we can call it that, is on 254. The Conservatives are still in government there. Sure, big improvement on now because they don't have that hefty majority, they don't have any majority. They'll struggle to pass legislation. They'd also need to form a pact with the DUP again, which is dangerous for both Brexit and the Northern Irish peace process. This is a terrible outcome. But Electoral Pact comes in, and even just assuming that those 5% seats flip and the vast majority go to Labour, so it's a no-brainer for them to do it, you suddenly have the Tories losing another 41 seats on top. That puts the alliance on 295 seats to the Tories' 275. Now that's not a majority. But what it is kicking the Tories out. They're gone. They're not in government. Johnson's out. The alliance will be able to form a minority government. It would be messy. The only legislation they could get through is that which also includes the SNP at least, but that's okay. Do you know what? There's plenty of repairs needed to the country from Tory damage that all of those parties can agree on. So much damage to repair. Now, if the 10% seats fell as well, that would be the alliance on 321 and the Tories on 249. Now, technically that's a majority. It's not a working majority. There would be enough backbenchers in Labour. You'd only need two, in fact, to sink any legislation. It would be tricky still. But let me tell you what it would do. First, the Tories are out of office. Absolutely, definitely out of office. And progressive parties are able to pursue a common agenda. You know, some in Labour won't be happy that we won't get the radical agenda that we would like to see. But you know what? That's not an offer. There is no outcome that gives us that. What we will see is progress, serious progress. Secondly, the Conservatives will be plunged into crisis. They will have lost access to the machinery of state. Some of them might even fear losing access to the shield against criminal investigations. But for the wider party, they may be forced to re-examine where Johnson's populism left them. Because what it'll have done, the Conservatives have always gained from the disunity of parties on the left. And what will have happened here is parties around the centre, centre-left and the left will have united against them. It's a bit like that scene in, what is it, Ants or something. Finally, it would show the power of uniting. Now, it does seem odd that Labour, the party born of union, should need such a lesson, but it might teach people that what's needed is electoral reform, not just for devolved bodies, but for Westminster above all. That swing just purely based on forming an alliance of three parties. That is the difference between Tory rule, albeit weakened, and coming back from the abyss. And this is where my hope lies. It's such an obvious policy, and the stakes are so high that I struggle to believe that the party leaders or even wider supporters won't go for it. Don't worry about them not forming that pact now. Don't go, but why don't they just agree it now? There's no point in agreeing it now. In fact, it would be damaging to agree it now, publicly. It's needed when the election's called. Better not to form it now. Keep the Conservatives wondering what they're up against. Because there are different types of cooperation that could be possible. They already fear it, the Tories. That's why they're legislating against multiple political organisations being able to pool resources. But an electoral pact doesn't really require that. It just requires a small amount of coordination. Such a small amount of coordination, so simple that I could do it myself in an afternoon. I could tell the parties which one should stand a candidate in each constituency. That's all you need to do. Decide which candidate within the alliance stands the best chance and do not put up other candidates. Ask activists in the area to campaign for the anti-Tory candidate. Some won't, that's fine. They're volunteers, no problem. But some will. It all helps. So this poll, it's both good and bad. You can look at it and say the result would be better than now, but it's still bad. You can see that the Tories would run a dirty but effective campaign and it could look even worse. They could actually retain that majority if it carried on. But you can also change that model to take account of an electoral pact and see the seismic change in the Tories' fortunes. I've said, from the start, the Tories won that huge majority, not because they got a load of votes. They didn't. They hardly got any more votes than Theresa May in 2017 when she lost a majority. They won a lot of seats by a small margin. That small margin is up for grabs. And an electoral pact is the difference between opposition parties having to campaign like they've never done before and achieving something that's just unprecedented and having a reasonably comfortable way of almost guaranteeing a route to government. Albeit a weak government. But a weak government is better than a Tory government by a country mile. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.